just the fact that you basically have to pay some, even if it's a small amount of money, you have to subscribe to read the news. It seems wrong.
Welcome to Beyond the Beat, a podcast by Chain Store, the agency to elevate your status in crypto. I'm your host, Pedro, and every week I'll be talking to the people in crypto media. We'll be telling their stories, their failures, their lessons, and whatever tips or tricks they've got up their sleeves.
Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of Beyond the Beat. Super excited to have Olivia Capozzalo. I hope I got your name right. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
I've been trying a couple new ways to start this off. So I thought, what better than to make my guests immediately uncomfortable and to ask them what has been top of mind for them in the last few, say, weeks, months, when it comes to whether that's crypto, whether that can be the media, you can take that in life in general. But yeah, I'm handing the baton over to you so you can take us wherever you want.
That's really okay, right? With the singers, top of mind for me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, honestly, right now I am very much looking for my next move. I'll put it that way. And so what's been top of mind for me is trying to figure out what that is. I recently left Crypto.news, and I was very briefly with them as editor-in-chief. And when I joined them, it all kind of happened serendipitously, as pretty much like everything in my crypto career has happened, in the sense that I was actually not planning on coming back to crypto media. That wasn't my intention. And I sort of briefly came back, and now I'm technically not working for any media company at the moment. So I'm back out, I guess you could say. And I'm just not sure what I want to do next. And it's like at this point I have a good variety of experience working in crypto. Like I certainly am not only a crypto media person, and we can get more into that, I guess, as I tell about my experience. But I can say a little bit about one project I'm really excited about and interested in right now. And then like maybe that will help.
Shill away if you want to shill away. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's only shilling because it's top of mind for me right now. It's very much what I'm thinking about, because I'm figuring things out. So basically, I'm advising, or I'm in a advisor capacity at the moment, a new project that is like a visual history of Bitcoin and crypto. You maybe saw it because the creator posted an ACJR a while back, a few months ago. But it's called the Grand Timeline. Does that ring a bell?
I haven't heard of this, but okay. I'm immediately intrigued.
It's basically, it's really cool. It's like a educational archive, like a project, because it's at the moment just in the ideation phase. It's not a live product yet, but it will be eventually, hopefully, like a web-based product. And it's super ambitious. It's trying to tell the whole story of crypto in a visual, like web-based interactive way, like data visualization, and basically it's a timeline, as the name suggests. So that also helps to understand, like, the format. And it's super interesting to me because obviously working in crypto media and content, you're always trying to help bring people into the space and like focus on teaching them about crypto and the basics and like where you start. And it's just always a question from any angle, basically, whether it's media or content marketing more broadly. And there are lots of resources out there, of course. Like there's plenty of content.
One can say there's almost too many resources out there.
There's plenty of content. There's every kind of content. There's video content. There's obviously like a lot of text-based stuff, and not to mention books. Like there's lots that's been written about Bitcoin and crypto. I think the cool thing about this project is that it's visual, it's sort of interactive, it's an internet product.
Interesting.
And in
I've
that
got a
sense,
controversial
it can also
question.
be updated. Yeah. Go ahead.
Is there a distinction, because you've said Bitcoin and crypto, and is there a distinction between the two? Is the project making that sort of, you've got a Bitcoin timeline and then you're going to have a crypto timeline?
No. I only said that because that's the way the creator phrases it at the moment. Like that's how it's presented. But I mean, I see it as kind of it's completely smushed together parallel process, but like Bitcoin is the beginning. So I mean, this timeline presents it that way. And whenever you do like
Maxis around the world are reeling listening to you right now, meshing them together.
It's not that it's
which
all
is fine by
same,
me.
But well, I mean, Bitcoin being the most important part, and certainly the start. So yeah, it's cool because like on the one hand, it's the attempt to make something somewhat like objective, at least in certain iterations, because obviously will continue to go as time passes, to be developed. But on the other hand, it's obviously created by, at the moment it's created by one person, and in general, like the question always the question when you're doing something like this is basically like who the author of the history is and how you select who's included and what's included. And it's a lot of responsibility, I think, and a lot of work needs to go into it to make it something that is useful to people. But basically, I'm not trying to actually, obviously that's, I don't want to like shill. It's not that there's so much to shill right now. It's
she says after shilling, I don't want to shill.
It's just that's like what I'm thinking about a lot right now. And I think it's a nice like segue into a larger conversation, because it feels like for me, like kind of a good focus or place that I want to work, like what I want to focus on within crypto, having worked in different capacities and created different kinds of content. This is the kind of content that I'm interested in at the moment, which is
that because like history sort of can be a little bit more unbiased, so to speak, and like or because like for example, while you were talking, the project by Pete Rizzo, like Bitcoin History, came to mind, and I've spoken to Rizzo quite a few times about Bitcoin history, and one of his main ideas is to sort of take away or like keep intact the neutrality of Bitcoin in how you present, whether that like different things that have happened over the years, and try to like depoliticize the conversation, the communication, the content that you're putting out there. And I thought that's a really interesting idea, especially because the media is supposed to be unbiased and neutral, but obviously everybody knows that's not entirely true. And I think especially in crypto media, and I know that can obviously spark, conversation in a million directions. But is that something that you think about that's sort of leaning you into that project?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. I think the main attraction for me at the moment is that it's really getting to the core of like what we say when we say like we want to teach people about this thing, this technology, this industry. So if that's the goal or intended goal of a lot of people working in content, it's not necessarily what I think. I'm using content more broadly again, just because I haven't only worked in crypto media. But I think when you talk to people about why they work in crypto media or what they like about crypto media or what's important about it, and some of the conversations you've had on your podcast are about this, it's very much about informing people like informing the public. It's a public good in that sense, keeping people informed and explaining things from this sort of insider perspective, because that's why we call ourselves crypto media and we sort of separate ourselves from traditional media covering crypto. And media, it's just, when we say crypto media, like every crypto media company does so many different things. It creates so many different kinds of content. I mean, not just the media itself, not just saying like different formats like video or text or whatever, podcast, but also just the variety of like types. So it's whether it's news or a more in-depth long form or a more investigative piece. I mean, it's just, the media has such a huge, overwhelming variety, I feel like, of content. And so coming back to this core thing, it's like, okay, I'm just thinking more broadly, this core goal of education or whatever is just not the best word, but let's just call it that for now. We're in a moment where there will be another huge wave of interest in crypto broadly, we think.
Are you calling the bull run right now?
We think. I'm calling it that it's going to happen. I'm not calling when it's going to happen. But basically, yeah. So I don't know how soon that's going to be, but basically I think people in the industry are or should be preparing for that in different ways. And as always, whenever there's like these waves of interest, there's going to be a bunch of new people focusing in on trying to understand what's going on, whether it's like the news or just what is crypto, what is this thing, what is this industry, what is this technology. So yeah, I mean, these are all sort of age-old questions, but I think one of the themes I see for myself over the past 8 years, 7 years, 7. No, wait, how long?
It's all a blur.
Sorry, I can't count. Since working in crypto, what I've seen is for myself is this through line of trying to find the most interesting and hopefully compelling ways to inform people and give them the information they're looking for. And it's been in many different formats. And so I like the idea of something that's like this, has a very clear goal. Like it's not trying to be everything, it's trying to be a history. And yes, the objectivity of it, although that's still very much, that's a huge question. Like how objective, what is objectivity? It's a huge philosophical question. But the attempt to do that, I think, is really important. And it, I hope, could be something really useful, again, as a resource for people, especially people who are unfamiliar with the space, to be able to say like, okay, crypto isn't just last year or today or a couple of years or since the last bull run. It's actually like this timeline actually starts in the 70s, which is really interesting. So just that context. And I think context is really, really important. And the thing that is so difficult for me about working in news media is the lack of context, or how to provide the context when you're reporting on the news. It's just, yeah. Like
I was gonna ask that, like exactly that question, because you've been editor-in-chief at Crypto News editor at CoinTelegraph.
And I was also editor-in-chief, but briefly before I left.
Editor-in-chief as well. And I was gonna ask, like, how much, does the media, obviously the media has to provide context, but when it comes back to that sort of what you were saying before, like it's quote unquote all about education, and like everybody peddles the idea of education, but it's a question mark whether that's what they're actually engaging in. Then like, does the media have that sort of responsibility or even motivation to provide that educational side of things when they're reporting? Or is it just like, nah, that has to fall in the hands of whatever else it can be, whether that's independent content creators, whether that's like I don't know, projects themselves, whether that's like protocols or whatever it is, and the media is only meant to just like tell the news or provide the sort of what's happening in the contingency in the now. I don't know if that laughter is like nervous or
I mean, basically, I think news media does have the responsibility to provide context, especially to provide accurate reporting, and that and context, at least in some formats. Obviously, like every news brief, you're really limited in terms of what you can include in a news brief. It's quite short. And right now, I just think the bar is pretty low. Like there are a lot of competing crypto media. There's a fair amount at the moment. And what I saw as like my goal, for example, at the brief time that I was just with crypto.news, was to at least to raise the bar a bit and to at least bring in a standard of like every single piece has to have some basic journalistic ethics, like sources and providing context in like at least a reasonable way especially for a news piece. I think it's really critical. I mean, I just don't really understand, like, if you're not doing that, who you're doing it for, basically.
yeah.
Like,
Do you think that we're not doing that a good enough job at like? I mean, we were talking about this before, that we were gonna put a little bit of gossip in here, and so everybody who's listening has to pull out their like start knitting and just like, all right, let's start threading here and start dropping what we think about different outlets. But yeah, what do you think? Like, and you can point fingers, and you can call out anybody you want.
I don't know. We'll see if I don't want to really call people out. But basically, I think it's pretty clear that there's like a few top crypto media companies. And what's interesting is like the top in terms of reputation, in terms of, I don't know, brand awareness, and just like the amount of people who know about them and trust, I guess, and reputation. Those few top media aren't actually the ones getting the most traffic. Interesting. Because traffic is such an important thing in the business model. That's a really just something that I think every company is struggling with at the moment, and they're always struggling with. But the fact that we have these companies that have a relatively solid reputation in the crypto media space, but they don't have the traffic that companies with the lower or less well-known companies have, is just like, I don't know I'm curious what you think about it, but it's a bit of a conundrum. And they also have other revenue models in place, like subscription models. And I know like some media companies are exploring with other formats now, and trying to kind of move away from the ad-based model.
Yeah.
Like newsletters, like Blockworks, and just other types of, and obviously paywalled research and stuff. The Block was doing that for a while and has always been seems to be sort of like relying on that, and then others have followed suit, and I don't know if it's working out for them because I don't have insight into
I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a tough moment for media, and I think in general, not just in crypto, but especially, I suppose it's maybe even more so in crypto, because things are just like happening so fast and changes are happening so fast that it's like, how do you even keep up with how like people are consuming their content, what kind of stuff they want to read on, what like feels like we're also sort of that ad-based model and traffic-based model is like, it's a reminiscent of an old school way of looking and approaching media and like things are happening so fast that I'm also intrigued, and I'm also fascinated by the fact that there isn't more experimentation happening from media or from
Yeah.
companies. And like the experimentation that's happening is like, we're going to go newsletter first. And it's like newsletters have been around for what, 15, 20 years. And I say this with like a little side business of newsletters. I love newsletters, but I find it
Mm-hmm.
interesting that that's like the innovation that's happening, you know? Like,
Yeah. No, totally. Yes. And in terms of, I'm definitely like thinking about all this stuff because it feels like I completely agree with you. It's like the model, nobody likes the ad-based revenue model, but people also don't like paywalled content. And that also, I don't know, I personally just like I understand the need for it, but I just feel like in mainstream media it's become absurd. Just like the level of just the fact that you basically have to pay some, even if it's a small amount of money, you have to subscribe to read the news. It seems wrong. Like it straight up is just not okay in my opinion. I'm not talking about research and like more sort of kind of I don't know, like alpha-esque content for a select audience. I'm talking about just like the basic news and the articles that are published.
I don't know, because like I think about it, and I think that's actually one of the damages that the internet has done. And it's going to sound sort of paradoxical because like the internet gave us like the free flow of information at all times, and that sort of like broadened obviously the news scope and the ability to tell everybody the news instantly and everywhere. But like before, you still had to pay the newspaper to actually read the news, even if it was just like a quarter or a dime or however much it was back in the day.
To
And I'm
buy the
not saying
paper.
that that was
Yeah.
the pardon.
You mean just to buy the paper? To
Yeah,
buy
just to
the
buy the
yeah, yeah.
paper and just to like read the news. And I'm not saying that was the right way, but I am saying that was the way. And there's a part of me that sides with you and thinks, yeah, we like information should be free and news should be free. But then it's like, all right. And I obviously this is like the endless question. Okay, then how do you maintain the outlet running and paying journalists like at least a decent wage, which is already a huge question mark around the world and not only in our
Yeah.
industry but abroad. So I don't know, and I'm not sure I have the answer. Obviously, that's I guess one of the reasons of these sort of conversations, to sort of see if we can find the answer to how it should be, because like ads suck and then
Mm-hmm.
paywalls also suck, and
Mm-hmm.
so and then finding content on the internet sucks, and like how do you verify you like I don't know, every does everything suck? This is like the
Mm.
moment of just like absolute
You're just
cynicism when
getting
it all
into a
comes out.
hole. Yeah.
Yeah,
Come
Olivia,
back,
you
come
have to
back.
pull me out right now.
Just come
I'm
on, yeah.
trusting you.
No. Everything doesn't suck. Yeah. So I
Just for
have some
those
thoughts about
wondering,
that.
I'm like an insufferable optimist, even though that like last mini rant is going to like put a question mark over that. But I am an insufferable optimist, and I believe everything is going at least better than it was before, even if the media surprisingly is trying to tell us otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let me think about the direction here. So I feel like there's a lot of interesting things we could get into right now. One thing is about formats of content consumption and just like the old internet model versus social media, new models that we already have that are just part of Web 2, but like what we could continue to experiment with as content creators or whatever, media people, content people. Because, like you said, it is a little bit like having newsletters be the innovation or focus on newsletters is maybe a bit surprising at this point.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of like, okay, how do you consume your news? I can share how I consume my news. It's like primarily in Telegram. And
Okay.
that's just how so I'm primarily I'm getting like what I love about Telegram. I'm a huge Telegram shill, but I don't know, like despite everything, the app itself I just think is really great in the sense that it like is sort of like some aspects of social media, but also because it's primarily, you know, a messenger app. It's like getting messages from news media is really just, for me, like a format that works, even though sometimes it's a bit I should probably like turn my notifications off because it's a bit invasive to be getting like
Yeah.
like messages about breaking news. But I'm really curious to hear how you consume news, because like again, in terms of thinking about what would be helpful to people, I have some experience like at these different, again, like news media outlets or companies where I'm doing content marketing, where we don't have to be driven by news, which is really nice and relieving. And of course, the question is, okay, so then like if we're creating content for people to keep them informed, or to whatever the goal is, to bring expertise, to bring insight into what's happening, how do we present it to them? And for me, like some of the most ideal formats for breaking news, I really like Telegram. For long form, or just for sort of curated, like catching up on stuff, I like podcasts, like news podcasts, once a week, weekly cadence. Even in crypto is I think it's great. Like I think it's fine to also have a daily cadence of like a roundup or something. And I think that's, so anyone who's doing those kinds of curation content products, whether it's a newsletter or a podcast, I think that's really valuable work, because you're helping to synthesize and package everything into an actual consumable amount. I really
What do you think about like? Yeah, sorry.
yeah.
I'm curious what you think about like the news cycle, because like you were head of a couple of newsrooms, and so you've obviously seen firsthand how to sort of keep that churn alive, or keep, I call it churn because a lot of the news cycle, and I say this as somebody who just left the Defiant and had a 3 article per day minimum, and so like I know what it's like to have to like really just like push out news, and it's something that I was constantly questioning. Yeah, where do you, because I agree, I like the weekly format, but where do you side on that sort of keeping that churn or that news cycle alive?
I mean,
Sigh says it all.
what do you mean? Like the thing
You
is,
went like
the reason that, I mean, okay, I guess my thought is from a pure not business perspective, where we didn't have to worry about ad revenue or revenue in general, but especially traffic-based ad revenue. I think we would be publishing less news, fewer articles. I mean, I feel like it's very clear that for many publications, the focus is quantity, and it's very clear why that is. And it's not because there's actually so many important things to say on a daily basis. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that there's 30 articles worth of interesting things to say a day. Like, are you?
I'm wondering if there's 30 articles worth a week of interesting things to say.
Right. So it's so clear that like the incentive is quantity, to have more traffic, to be able to sell ads and support, even break even, to be able to pay your team.
So is the move?
So it's
is the move then? Sorry, but is the move then sort of for media outlets to become just like a branch of something else? You know?
Well, that's one move, and I think that. So when I joined OKX in 2020, I joined as head of content, and it was like the first, they were building out the global team, marketing, and in general the global facing team for that company. And so there was no like marketing team or content really, at least not for the international community, like not in English. And my strategy was basically, we're going to build an in-house research an analysis team that's like a mini media, or it's like what I see as some of the most valuable things that a media could bring. Some of those valuable like content products. We're going to do that. We're not going to write the news because the news is being covered by many other lovely publications in this space. And I don't see at the moment a huge need for another crypto media company covering the news the way that we're currently all covering it. Like maybe I'm not thinking big enough, but I don't see a particular need for that. If someone is innovating on that model in some way and is able to fund innovating on that model, and not just writing the same news pieces, then that is, yeah, there's potential for that. But like basically what I was thinking was, okay, we have this big exchange, OKX, that has, its business model, very successful business model running. So we don't have to worry about funding or any kind of revenue model. We're just creating insightful content. That's our goal. It's like the funnest part of working in media.
Yeah, no doubt.
And we did that. And I think I think that is a model that we see several companies doing. And every time I see another company doing that, whether it's an exchange or a VC fund or somebody who's creating like a media arm or a research arm, I'm happy about it because okay, sure, there could be problems with conflict of interest, but the structure can be set up in a way that I think basically is like makes that moot. Because first of all, you can have a separate brand entirely. I think a lot of people, the way OKX did it, was still within the larger brand. It wasn't like, a totally separate company. Having a separate brand really helps with, I think, building the editorial independence because it's more clear that it's a separate company. But yeah, I mean, it also isn't, the reason I think it's a good thing is because it just ends up creating more insightful work that we're doing as an industry. It contributes to the industry in a way. So even if it's backed by a VC or backed by a big exchange, doesn't make it less valuable.
I agree. I agree, and I think it's definitely worthwhile, and it would be nice to see, I suppose. Well, I don't know if it'd be nice to see more of, but I do think that there is a place, and I do think that there's like a couple. I shout these guys out a lot, like Protos. I shout out a lot on the show because I'm a big fan of like the way they present the news, because they're like crypto media, but they've got that sort of adversarial sort of like editorial line, and so they're questioning like a lot of the tropes and a lot of the things that the rest of the media is just like reporting on, and so it gives you that sort of backside. And I think they're doing they're innovating at least the way they're presenting the news, even if it's very just like straightforward news and just like written content mostly. I do think that they're presenting it in a different way, but then at the same time, like the idea of like companies doing in-house, and I do think that like the consumer, the reader, whatever it is like a bit sort of reticent maybe in the beginning to start like consuming content that comes from a big company, or that even if it's like part of that, or even if it's not in-house necessarily and it has like a branching off of the company. I think that there's something there that might make it a little bit hard to gain traction, but I don't know, this is just like me questioning it, but I think it's interesting.
I mean, another obvious like I think model that we are seeing and that probably will continue to grow is the like data companies. So the on-chain data people who already have just like such powerful tools and a business model based around those tools, based around access to them. They, like Nansen or something, they have a research branch. They do specifically, and others do. But developing that, I think, is probably like also a very clear fit in terms of like, again, just providing another source of revenue that's not ad based. So you have the it's like, it's sort of more similar to Bloomberg Terminal, like in the sense that you have this product, and the product itself is a tool for journalists or for content, for researchers. I mean, it's just, there's so, I think there's a lot of like, maybe untapped potential there, in terms of that, like, synergy, or like that, the combination of those two types of initiatives.
What pisses you off the most about crypto media? Pulls out a massive list of, falls to the ground, rolls away.
I mean, it's like I'm trying to think about what. I mean, I think the low bar pisses me off. So just like and this is all because of just the nature of like the industry. It's still relatively easy to make money in a short period of time. So you get these companies that are just like sprouting up, like a media company. I mean, specifically, I'm not going to get into the other kinds of crypto companies, but in terms of media, it just feels like there's a low bar for standards and quality, and that means that these companies that are like not doing great work can still exist and fund themselves, which is kind of frustrating. Maybe that sounds, I don't know, it sounds bitter, and definitely like not doesn't sound like the most positive in terms of like, everyone should be allowed to exist and compete. But just in terms of the practices I've seen, like, I think it would be, it's one of those things where, like, first of all, again, ACJR existing is helping this a lot. And I think it's like it's a very important organization to deal with.
Are you just saying that because I'm on the board? For those of
No.
for the millions that are listening in right now, the ACJR, the Association of Crypto Journalists and Researchers, is an organization that exists.
What is it?
I mean, I grapple with this question a lot, and one of the reasons why I applied to the board was because I wanted to figure out, like, on the inside, what the organization did, how it operates, what's the point of it. A year later, I wish I had more answers. I mean, we're like speaking to what you were saying before, actually, about Telegram. Like, I feel like we're just like a Telegram group and that's it. And we could be doing so much more. And like, sure, we do like events and things like that, and here and there. But yeah, I didn't.
Well,
want
I'm not going to comment on what, because I don't.
The ACJR. But
I don't have the insider information on what you guys have planned and what you're doing. But from the outside, I can say that just having that forum, basically having that place where we can, just a group in Telegram where that's public, I think it, like I was saying to you before we started, it's created this camaraderie, a sense of camaraderie for me, or just a sense of like us all being in something together, that it was harder to get that sense before this thing was created, and specifically like the public Telegram. So I think, yeah, and I don't want to comment on like what you guys could be doing better to establish standards. I know that that's like part of the goal and the sort of, the reason that this association exists. And I think it's super important. It's still early days, but we definitely see a huge range of standards and just a few publications that I think are really doing a good job in terms of, like, again, that integrity and rigor and the standards and journalistic ethics that we want to see as an industry, it's really like a handful of publications doing that, and they're not even necessarily getting the most traffic, again, problematically. So and I think also for transparency amongst people in the media, like journalists and editors and all of the people who are in that Telegram chat group, having a place like that is also just helpful, I think, for people, like for knowledge sharing for sure, which people are doing all the time. And also, raising standards in terms of like getting a better sense of how other media are doing things, what their basically compensation looks like. What it just establishes, it opens up communication. It's not exactly like trying to be a union, for example. It's not going that far, but it opens up, I feel like, more opportunity for different crypto media people to talk to each other. And a lot of us have, this is part of like, I don't know, not the gossip, but like we all have worked, or many people have worked at multiple publications. Like it's really common that either you are working at multiple publications at the same time or you have. So we and it's a small industry. I mean, that's always the case in media, but it's like, since it's such a small industry, we really kind of have the opportunity to like help each other out and communicate with each other and have access to sharing insights basically about what it's like to work in the industry.
To flip the question then, what do you think the media is doing right? Or what are you looking at that you think, this is going well?
I mean, nothing. Just kidding.
Lengthy silence.
Just kidding. No. I mean, like the media is doing the good work they set out to do, which is like covering the space. And there's some publications that are doing that, and are basically doing that in a more vigorous way, and some that are breaking stories that need to be told that haven't been. And it's like, I'm very happy that there's a variety of crypto media that exists and that are trying to keep it's not about keeping people, it's not just about keeping people informed, it's having this like specialized knowledge and coming from sort of being insiders in a space and being able to express that to the rest of the world, hopefully. So that's another thing that's just a constant goal in terms of raising the standards, in terms of providing context and like just the basics of what you're doing in a crypto media. I keep coming back to like, who is this for? Who are we doing this for? And trying to expand that as much as possible so that it's not just us doing it for each other. And that's what happens when you don't use context, because like, we all know about that thing that happened. We all know about the intricate relationship between these different companies, so we don't need to explain it because we all know. It's like, obviously, most people don't know that. Most people aren't crypto insiders, and we're trade publications. Or if I'm representing all of crypto media, we're like insiders in the sense that these are trade publications. So in terms of what they're doing right, I'm just happy that exists in this space, trade publications, that I was part of one relatively early. And it's just, that was such a crazy way to be introduced to the industry and like get my education. and I think it's really as critical as ever, because we still see mainstream media, they're obviously, just on another level in terms of attention, in terms of traffic, and in terms of trust and reputation, everything. When some of these mainstream media publications, even the ones that have like opened up dedicated desks to crypto, you still see this coverage that not always, but sometimes feels like it's coming from, it's just clear that the person writing or editing the piece doesn't have the background that a lot of people in crypto media have, and they don't have the context, meaning like they can't provide that layer of explanation. I mean, that might not be fair. I don't know. What do you think about that? But that's what I still see.
I think there's a huge divide. So you've got like the crypto media publications that are like all trade pubs and like deeply like in the know and like catering to the like purely or hardcore crypto audience. And then you've got like traditional media that's like, okay, this is a thing. I'm not entirely sure how big this thing is going to be, but it's enough for me to at least give it some attention. And since I don't really know what sort of attention to give it, I'm going to just like put somebody on that's like remotely interested, but that also doesn't really know much how it operates or anything. Or maybe they do, and then they file stories that edit the editors, since they don't know much about it, and they're like, I'm not really entirely sure about the story, this and that. That sort of breaks it down again, and out comes these sort of like wonky articles and like media publications and things that don't entirely understand what's going on. And then, like you say, like crypto media publications are so steeped in like the deep crypto stuff without providing any context that it's like, okay, what do you expect like the Wall Street Journal journalist to just like dive on a bunch of different podcasts to report on like the breaking news or things happening? And so it's like, so where are they supposed to get their news from, or where they're supposed to even learn from? And so I think that's also something that we're seeing more of, like, and and to take it back to that question that I asked in the beginning, because this is something that I've also been increasingly thinking about. I feel like like every publication, and this might sound a bit controversial, and this is so that the maxis sort of get some peace of mind from this conversation. I do personally think that like big media publications should be thinking about like a specific Bitcoin reporter or a specific Bitcoin journalist, because things that happen in the Bitcoin ecosystem are like comparatively different from an incentive structure, from like a company perspective, from how like even the audience and the user base is. Like people who focus specifically on Bitcoin and are Bitcoin only people, they're different from like crypto agnostic consumers and users and like audiences. And so, and I think that's actually like what, like, I feel like that's an untapped opportunity for for media outlets to be like, all right, we're going to put a Bitcoin specific reporter, you know, somebody who understands the nuances of the culture, of the thought process, of the history.
In a mainstream media publication?
No, just like starting out in like crypto, in a crypto publication. And then obviously it'll take ages for that to actually come to fruition in mainstream media, because they don't even know where they're standing on just like what's happening in our world. So, but that's something that I've also been thinking about that I'm not seeing much of. There's a couple. I know that Laura Shin at Unchained had like a job opening for like a Bitcoin specific reporter. I myself at the Defiant, we joked around that I was the Bitcoin reporter there, even though I covered like a wide breadth of stories and things like that. But yeah, that's something that I'm thinking about, even going like further into the niche.
I'm also thinking about,
I don't know if you agree or disagree.
Yeah, I mean,
if that makes sense.
I do think it feels like it's been too early to have really, really specific beats, but now maybe it's not too early. So I think you're right. And it may be time to be developing that. And again, just like not having everyone be a generalist, or relatively a generalist. The other thing I've been thinking about in terms of like where media could go, crypto media, and I was talking to a friend in the industry about this recently, is just like more hyper local media. And again, not the way it's being done now, which is we all are writing in English. Everything is primarily global first, but with English being the language. of the main publication, like the original language that articles are published in. And then some publications, if they have sorry, my camera's blurry. If they have the budget, they're creating like localized versions of their media. And that just sort of scales. But the localized versions are usually pretty much just translations of the English into another language. And then sometimes, in some cases that I'm aware of, you'll have like local reports, but it's really not not developed, at least from those bigger media like CoinTelegraph. So yeah, what do you think about that?
I agree. And being being a Chilean and being like Latin American and here based, I would love to see much more like locally sourced, because there's a lot happening here. But I understand that like the focus, like we were saying before, like this ad like traffic based model is like forcing us also to go to like the big hubs and like the top of funnel sort of thing for news, which is the US, and then to a lesser degree I suppose Europe and that sort of stuff. So it's I do think that there is a market and there's demand for like locally sourced and like in original language reporting. But I'm unsure how that can sort of find its way out there, you know? I don't know if that makes sense.
I mean, yeah, as part of, it could be part of just the way it is now, like having these sort of franchise model desks, like local desks, the way that mainstream media does it, but the way that crypto media is doing it now is not quite like on the ground reporting. It doesn't look like that to me, at least. It's more like translating the global stuff. And like you're saying, like we're all focused on mostly US centric news, especially around regulations, and it's just it's so limited. And that is also like, when coming back to our conversation of like, is there really that much that we need to be writing about every day? Like, are there really 30 pieces of important news every day? We're not even talking about the like, I mean, there maybe are more interesting stories, but we're talking about these like generalized kind of mostly US focused stories. So that limits
and I mean,
everything. Yeah.
I suppose budget has something big to say. And I think like at the moment, the question is, what's the incentive for like a news organization that isn't in the specific region that we're talking about to report on the things that happen in the specific region? And this is something that actually pisses me off, because everybody's like so quick to talk about decentralization and that we need to distribute more and we need to like banking the unbanked and that sort of stuff. And it's like, all right, so why don't you like hire a few local reporters? You push out something like in like a Latin American news desk, and you have local reporters like writing stuff in Spanish directly, chatting to because there's so many interesting products and services and things happening and stuff that's getting done. That's like you say, why are we just translating it and pushing it out? You know, like why don't we have like something that's specifically about the local ecosystem?
It's local media. I mean, it can be like the easiest model is it being like a branch of a larger one, instead of saying, "Oh, we'll open these independent local ones," because then their revenue is limited. But I think it's just more work.
Yeah, it is more work. But then that's going back to something we were saying in the beginning. Like, should news be free, or should what? And this is, I guess, a question that I hadn't thought about until now, but what's the responsibility of the reader also to fund what it's reading?
Okay. The other thing is,
there should be a big sign. For that, I have thoughts.
lots of models for that, like, donation based, whatever, like NPR or something. But that is okay. What I want to talk about, what I really would like to hear your thoughts on, and I just feel like it's not talked about enough, is like actual Web3 journalism. Like, what we're technically Web3 journalists, or maybe I'd prefer not to use that term, but say we're crypto media people, more or less. Some of us more, some of us less. And we cover the space, but like we're not using Web3 tools for the most part to do that. And that's because, again, the companies are just companies trying to make money with ad-based revenue, and the journalists, the editors are not owners, and they're not sharing in that revenue at all. They're just receiving their salaries, and usually it's on a freelance model for a lot of people, at least for the journalists, meaning they're just getting essentially paid per article or possibly on a salary, but basically like just like very bare bones. And it's understandable how this is just like, yeah, the way it's been going, because it's the Web2 way, well, for media at least. Ad-based revenue, just lower costs as much as possible, pay people as little as possible, and get as much traffic as possible so you can get revenue. So it has nothing to do with Web3. So the question is, and obviously many very smart people are asking this question, are building platforms for incentivizing better incentive structures where like the reader is paying for what they're consuming, and not in a Web2 subscription model, but in a Web3 subscription model, or tipping or donating, which hopefully I think the ideal would be it's more seamless. Yeah. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Because it feels like that keeps being like swept under the rug. We're like, well, we can't do that or something.
Well, I think that actually responds to a deeper issue, which is like thinking of different ways to organize workplaces and like worker structures and payment structures. So I don't think like the Web2 way is like specific. Yeah, it's like a layer thing. I think this is like an economic system way, you know, like and I was having this conversation actually over the weekend, like how to create different ways where workers can get more ownership over what they're working on and what they're doing. And that requires a different thought process or a different understanding of how a company can do better, from C-suites, from managers, to be like, all right, so should we be distributing revenue also and profits also to the person that's like doing the work to make this company go forward? In my eyes, of course. Yeah, in my eyes, of course. But like, say that to a C-suite, or say that to like an executive or like a founder or something like that, you know? It's like, and this is a question I had last year. I got laid off, you know, like freelancers got laid off. And I was just thinking to myself, because they had to cut costs and things like that. And I just thought to myself, which companies think about like dropping the salaries of the managers or administration or top level, but instead they just cut costs at the bottom, you know, and then force their workers to work even more, squeeze them out, you know, where at the top everybody is receiving the same. Yeah, exactly. And so when it comes to Web3 or like crypto media, like different incentive structures, and this is going to go like deeply against the like a lot of the underlying ethos in crypto, because crypto is deeply like capitalistic, you know, and thinking about different. I mean, there's obviously like different segments. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
go ahead,
I think that
it's deeply capitalistic, but yeah.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I think that like it requires a deeper thought process or a deeper thought thinking, and like even a motivation or an eagerness to change from like the top levels, the ones who are like actually just like making the payment structure or incentive structure for their workers, to think differently about this kind of stuff, you know, and to be, all right, you own your work. Do you want to really own your work? All right, I'm going to give you some share of the profit. I'm going to also ask for your opinion, and maybe even go so far as to give you not only a voice, but a vote in how this is going to advance, how this is like, who are we going to partner with, all that sort of stuff. And that's a deeply taboo thing to like say in like a traditional company structure. Yeah. There's like, I don't know. I know that DAOs are obviously like changing these things up. I'm a big fan of like cooperative style workplaces, as you can see, obviously, from my mini rant here. But there's different ways to think about it, I think. But and that's also, that falls on the responsibility of the worker of like demanding this kind of stuff, but it also falls on the responsibility of like the top level to also be
Yeah.
okay with like questioning how things work.
I mean, it's awesome and very ambitious to think about it in general for businesses. But I do think in specific for content-based businesses like the media, it's not a bad fit. Like it's a good fit potentially in terms of like thinking about how could you measure contribution? How could you, because if you have a whole other kind of business, uh, making its revenue from the product itself and like charging a fee or whatever it is, like whatever the business model is, it seems like a little bit more difficult to determine like how each person in the company maybe is
I don't
gets,
know.
well,
I mean,
maybe it's not more complicated, maybe I'm making this, but it just feels like, because, well, and also there are platforms that people have created already to try to like specifically for content creation to try to make a more direct relationship between the reader and the content producer. So that's not solving the question of a newsroom with like editorial layers and how that all would work out. I think it's a huge challenge, and I don't personally know anyone doing it. Do you? like a straight up web3 business model news media.
nothing comes to mind, at least.
I think I'm so mad, and I hate when it's like there probably is someone doing this, and I just don't know, and I'm just like, we're just oblivious, and that's
Yeah.
if that's
If
the
anybody is
case.
listening to this and knows of a company or a project doing something like that, please reach out.
Because
I'll put
obviously,
that out
yeah,
to the.
there's the ones that are just like more of a, I don't know what you want to call it, but content creation platform, blog platform like Mirror, XYZ, or like just where you're blogging, you're the creator, and you can have a direct relationship, financial relationship, I guess, with the people who consume your content, and that's solving one aspect of the problem, but it's not
Hmm.
solving the company structure that you're talking about. And the thing that's like, it's a really interesting larger conversation, because of course like co-op style companies have existed, and it's, people have experimented with that, and they do exist. And then Web3 gives us like a DAO structure, so we have kind of like potentially the tools to make that work in a more decentralized way. So, but this relationship to capitalism is interesting to explore, like how innately capitalistic the industry is.
I mean, it
Um,
is. It is, and like to deny it, because a lot of people, when I have this conversation, deny it, and I think is a bit myopic, and like it's just a reality, like a hyper financialized world, like where like,
what are the arguments in denial? Or
well, they always fall back on the idea that that crypto is inherently decentralized and non-hierarchical, and like, so obviously like it's not like that, because like we and then DAOs obviously come into the conversation, and I mean, yeah, so that I think it's they take it to more an abstract level, because personally
yeah.
I don't think there are any arguments to like deny it, like any, like at least the ones that I've seen or that I've heard. um but
Hmm.
it, but because there is also like a deep love for capitalism in our industry, and for everything. At least that's how I feel. I mean, I could be wrong, and maybe I'm hanging out or I'm listening to the wrong conversations, but that is something that I do feel that
Yeah.
comes our way. And so when it comes to like media, or it's tough, because you also have the question of like, yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's tough, because like, how do you fund like journalism and journalists, and like the like investigations and things like that, and
Well,
like
that's why.
Web3 can provide something, like you've got apps like Fountain, where you can like stream sats to people, but like, yeah, streaming 150 people listening to your podcast, streaming a sat, a podcast, like it's not going to put food on the table, is it?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think at the moment, all of the like direct revenue models are just in this sort of new experimental phase. So yeah, it's not like necessarily working enough for people to be able to like replace a full-time salary. But and I also think there's also the problem of like trying to put in Web3 tools where they don't need to be, or like
That's very Web3
Web2
though.
tools work
That's very
as
crypto.
well. Yeah, it is. And that's also really problematic. So it's like getting to the really hardcore, like when you actually need a DAO and you're actually all like voting and there's no ownership or there's no hierarchical owner. It's kind of like you said, a more abstract reality. It's not actually it just feels like it hasn't been done enough to really have a good sense of like how that could work. But I just feel like media is positioned well to attempt that kind of new structure and experiment with that structure more than we're doing now, media and content, because it is a public good. Like, you're not creating a product that people consume and or rather a tool that people use, and then you like basically use. Okay, that made no sense, but let me start over. Let's take something sort of basic and important for crypto infrastructure, like an exchange. People need an exchange. They need on and off ramps with fiat. They need to be able to trade crypto. They need that infrastructure. It's provided to them fully Web2, and the exchange takes a cut. They take a fee, and that's how they make money on the volume of trades. So it's very like simplistic in that way, but it's very also more of a clear like web product that you're a consumer using. Whereas like, again, content and media is more along the lines of a public good. That's why I prefer it to be as available as possible, as free as possible. It's there for informing your decisions that you're making on an exchange. It's there for giving you more insight so that you you're more equipped to understand the risks of what you're doing with crypto. And this is, again, thinking about the model of crypto as like sort of a more financialized crypto model. Cryptocurrencies. And that's like, that a public good is just a bit of a different product. I mean, it really is. It's not, it shouldn't be thought of the same way, I think. So in terms of like who should pay for it, I mean, it's a tough question. But I know that I personally don't like to be required to pay to access an article, but I would be okay with donating or supporting a source or a person or an individual or a company, some resource that I enjoy or trust or whatever, have some association with that I need. Donating or like giving, voluntarily contributing, that feels better to me personally. I don't know. Subjectively.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's, for example, one of the ways that like that would be that's maybe one of the ways that like that crypto can plug into this, where it's just like an easy one-click pay in, you immediately become a subscriber, a follower, and that like gives you access to all the content, and then you're just like immediate. I don't know, that could make it, instead of like, I want to subscribe and put my credit card details and like sign up with this and sign up with that. Maybe that's like an easy, seamless way to think about this sort of stuff. Because I agree, I get annoyed about having to write for or like pay for any specific article, but there are independent journalists or stuff or people or that I would happily, and there are some actually that I do support financially, and that I am a like a monthly subscriber to. And I think that, but that does require, for starters, income, like a decent, and this is one of the problems that I think like happens sometimes in Latin America, where like you get, if let's say you read 5 different newsletters, and each newsletter is charging you $5 to $10 a month to be able to like list, to be able to read their read their articles or something like that. You go up to like $50 to $100.
No,
or
yeah,
$25 to $50. That's a lot. So
it's,
I don't know.
That's not exactly the model. I mean more of a model like NPR, just being the first thing that comes to my liberal mind, but like that they collect donations, but it's still available. It's available to the public, and I don't think they don't have it's not Patreon or something with like exclusive content, but they're like all fully donation based. And any media that does that, or any creator that does
It
that,
would be
it's like
interesting
you're
to find out
creating
how it
public.
was in the beginning.
Yeah, how it was funded originally, because it's always starting out from the perspective of either the business or the person creating this content. It's not really clear, like that's all fine when you have an audience. Like that's potentially sustainable, but when you're building one, not so much. And which also brings to mind like other ways that, again, a public good could be funded, I guess, like some kind of grant, or potentially like government funding also. And that's also what we see in current existing models for like education.
There's also the idea that
media,
we were
but
there was also the idea that we were talking about with Tal, who's one of the guys at Chain Story, who's behind this whole project, which is the idea of like bounties for investigative journalism, for example. Like it was a very early stages idea and something that we're starting to like grease the wheels on. But like the idea of not only grants, but like a bounty, and say propose a series of topics, and then people vote on it, and you can deposit and allocate funds to like vote on that specific topic. And like journalists can either they can propose the topic, or they can apply to cover it or research it, and then whoever wins gets that bounty, for example, and gets get paid, I suppose, half in and then half on publishing, so it actually gets done and all that sort of stuff. There's things that we need to,
and it's like crowdfunded, like the bounty itself. Yeah, it's an interesting model. I mean, again, like, and hopefully Web3 tools, or just like using crypto and crypto infrastructure could make that more seamless, and just like make that potentially work better than if it was a Web2 process. And I think it would be better. But we'll see if people actually try that out. And again, like, I would like to see people experimenting with that stuff. I would like to experiment with it myself. And
me too.
And we see, it's like I do still feel like it's quite early, and we've really seen crypto media over the past, I think 10 years is too long, but between 5 and 10 years, we've seen it develop quite a lot. And I think it's become a lot more professional, and a lot more rigorous, and a lot more kind of like have a lot higher standards. And that's very good to see, but we haven't seen crypto media pushing boundaries and experimenting more with like incentive models. I mean, again, on a larger scale, like the bigger brands, the brands that potentially could do more experimentation. We're not seeing that as much. And like you said, going back to like, what is it that we're experimenting with? We're not experimenting with like Web3
newsletters.
That's right. And that's maybe that's not surprising, because again, it's still a new industry, and the technology is very new, so we're all just doing what's more comfortable and easier for us. But I definitely hope to see some more like potentially Web3 based journalism and Web3 based content projects get more traction. Again, they exist. It's not like they don't exist. To see them experimented with in different ways.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't know. I was just gonna say, and like there's different like audiences and needs also that could have different models. Like you said, like the bounty, a crowd-funded pool of money for a long-form investigation is going to take time. That's for a maybe a smaller audience of people who are really interested in that. But honestly, probably more people than we think, because some of these like uncovering these bigger stories that take more time, those are what the mainstream media ends up covering sometimes. And get that is always like, and their audience is obviously much larger than crypto media, and that is what gets a lot of attention, and in many cases it's like something negative, so that's also a problem. But then there's the other kind of, there's the news that we've been talking about, like what needs to actually be written as news and how that model would work, and it would definitely be a different one, not about news. It's like the speed is different and the audience is different, and it's like what people are looking for from news is very different from what they're looking for from an analysis. Did you see the article the other day in Wired? I think it was like,
which one?
Yesterday? When was that? 24th. It was an article like about ZachXBT, like
it's
profile.
It's on my reading list, but still haven't gotten to it.
Yeah, and I don't know. I just bringing that up because like he's an example of I think he, right? Yeah. He's an example of like a investigative, I don't want to call him a journalist, but some people call him like a detective. On-chain detective, which is a super fun title. I would go with that personally.
100%, yeah.
And so he's doing like investigative work all the time, fully independently. And so that's like a particular model that exists because he gets donations, and that's how he lives. Like he doesn't work for a company, but he is, according to this Wired article, considering starting a company, which also sounds really
interesting.
Fun, like a detective company.
Yeah, if there's any on-chain, if there's any digital detectives out there, there's a market for you.
For sure. And I mean, he seems to be doing quite well based on donations. But again, he has like a huge following, and he was like a trader before that. And it also has to do with just like, being a prominent person, even a person.
I also think that there's a matter of like putting in the legwork to like in those initial stages of just like learning all this stuff and just like really putting in the hours and the days and just like properly learning. Like it'd be interesting to ask him how long it's taken him and how it was in those early stages and what happened along the way and things like that. Because a lot of times I think what deters people sometimes is like, and this is like a wider conversation of like looking at that and it being like this unattainable thing to be able to properly understand how to read a blockchain and analyze it and all this sort of stuff. And so like that becomes like a huge mountain to trek. But
not everybody is going to do that kind of journalism or that kind of work. I don't know if we want to call it journalism. So yeah, for sure. That's I think of that as just like a really specialized subset of.
That's like not even a micro niche. That's like a nano niche.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be bigger than it is.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Again, thinking about companies like Nansen and the amount of just the like sheer amount of information they have is just wild. Because I mean, it's not just like information. They have a platform with like, they tag things specifically, they organize it a specific way that makes it possible to navigate. I wouldn't say it's like easy. You also have to like learn how to do that, but there's just so much, I think, like untapped potential with that in terms of like the kinds of stories we could be telling if we were sleuthing around more.
100%.
Yeah. So that's very cool.
It is very cool. And I think we've gone slightly over the hour. Time flew by with this conversation. This was brilliant. I want to, and I feel like I'm going to walk away with a lot of things to think about, and I'm sure that we'll talk behind the screens about a few of these things, because I think that things are starting to come up and ideas are starting to come around. But I always end these conversations on the same two questions, because I'm always interested in what like journalists and people in the media are reading. And so because I find that good writing, good journalism, good understanding of the world and how to inform the world is like books come into are a key factor in that. And so the questions are, what are you reading at the moment, and what book have you been recommending lately? It doesn't, or that you recommend in general. It doesn't have to be crypto related or Bitcoin related. It can be literally about anything.
Yeah, it won't be crypto related.
Yeah, sounds good. All right.
Not reading or won't recommend. Not that I don't have ones to recommend, but that isn't what I've been recommending. So I'll try to answer your question honestly.
I honestly is ideal. Yeah.
Yeah. So currently I'm reading a novel called The Life of Klim Samgin by Maxim Gorky. It is an epic novel in Russian. It was written in like the 20s to 30s, but it's, when I say epic, I mean it's quite long. It's multiple volumes and like thousands of pages, but multiple volumes, and it's unfinished because Gorky died while he was still writing it in like I think 36. And yeah, spent quite a long time writing it. But basically it's this novel that covers the life of this man, Klim, who is, his family is like sort of the bourgeois kind of intelligentsia type of person. They live in like a mid-sized city outside of, not in St. Petersburg or Moscow. And it covers his whole life. So it spans from like the end of the 19th century and like into basically the events leading up to the 1917 revolution, or just and the other revolutions. But the like social, the situation in Russia at that time, and the like just huge shifts that are happening in society. That's kind of like the focus of the book, but through telling the story of the life of this one person. And it's super dialogue based. So like, I think that what's amazing about it is you're getting like a sense of all of these different ideas and schools of thought that are being like thrown around at the time, and sort of like, again, the late 19th century, early 20th century in Russia, from the perspective of the characters. So there's like different characters kind of represent different schools of thought that they're like experimenting with Bolshevism being like one of them, but not the only one. And I'm like 15% through or something. I'm reading it on Kindle. It's taking me a long time. The thing about it though is that I know it was translated immediately. Like it was translated when it was published. And it had some other title, not directly that, but you can,
okay,
if anyone's interested, they can Google it, The Life of Klim Samgin.
yeah.
And I think it exists in English, but I don't know if that like translation, the original translations are still being like printed, or it doesn't seem to have a lot of interest or notoriety in English, weirdly. And I think that there's an interesting story there that someone should uncover as to why it hasn't been more widely published in other languages. But yeah,
Okay.
It's quite epic and like amazing, and it's just taking me a long time because it's not only I speak Russian and I read Russian, obviously, but the language is also not like, there's a lot of vocabulary that's not contemporary Russian because of the time it's set in 100 years ago. And so I have to do a lot of looking up, which is fine.
I mean, it's another way of reading, I suppose. And is that also going to be like what you're reading and your recommendation?
No, yeah, sorry. Okay, that was a lot of explanation for that book because it's just such a it's such an intense book. But
Sounds like
it's
it.
also kind of like a history. But yeah, the book I would recommend, or that I've been recommending recently, it's really hard to choose because, like, yeah, I guess I could recommend a novel, but I'm going to recommend a nonfiction book that I have been recommending, which is A Brief History of Neoliberalism by David Harvey. Have you heard of
Oh
that?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Have you
yeah.
read it?
I
Okay.
have, I have.
Okay.
Yeah, my dad is he's an economist, former world banker, former ECLAC here in Latin America, who's a staunch anti-neoliberalist. He actually has a book
Okay.
called Chile and the Neoliberal Trap. And so,
Wow.
yeah,
Well,
David Harvey has been on our conversations and on my radar for a while. Great book.
on the
Yeah.
same team.
On the
So
same
that's,
team.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's I think it says it's called A Brief History, and it is written for like a non-academic audience, but it is quite dense, but worth putting in the effort to read it, in my opinion, just because it's relatively digestible, relatively short, and it's like extremely relevant. It was published in 2005, but which is it's kind of crazy because it's just still so relevant, and I really wish that he would write like an updated version
Yeah.
now, because there's so many things that are like just sort of starting to happen.
Mm.
But yeah, it's I think it's just really, really critical to understanding what is happening right now.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
and it speaks to our conversation about just like the system that we currently live in, and that like many people seem to be satisfied with, but many people are not. And yeah, David Harvey is a very
He's a
I
must read.
think
He's a must read.
a must
Like,
read. Yeah,
yeah, he
definitely.
should be on your, even if you like strongly disagree with everything he says, he still should be on your reading list and just like on your radar. And
Yeah,
I mean,
he
I'm
has a
not a big,
podcast also.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, he's brilliant. I'm a big fan. But yeah, that was a great way to end on, and I'm happy that we ended up aligned on David Harvey and his ideas, along with a lot of other
Being
stuff that we've had.
anti-neoliberalism.
We ended on a bit anti-neoliberal
We love
note,
that.
which is always makes me very happy.
Me too.
But yeah, Olivia, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a brilliant conversation. I'm excited for the ones that are on their way. I feel like we dabbled into a lot of things that we can branch out afterwards. But yeah, thank
Yeah.
you so much for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would love to follow up on any of those topics at some point.
Nice, for sure. All right, thanks everybody for listening, and I'll see you next week.